Happy Wednesday, everybody. Thanks for Tebow and Margaret for inviting me here during a few. I will begin now. We have good group audience here, about 30 plus people here, and I always like leaving it open for questions. And if you have questions, you can put it in the chat if it's real time, and I will also leave plenty of time afterwards. First off, my name is Alan Stein. If anybody wants to connect with me on LinkedIn, I always appreciate that. You can scan the QR code or you can look me up there and join me and follow me on LinkedIn. So a little bit about me. When I worked at Facebook, now called Meta, Sheryl Sandberg used to give talks to a lot of employees and said that our careers are not a ladder. It's not a career ladder, but more like a jungle chain. And I really like that analogy. And that's kind of how I look at my career. So I started working as a 14-year-old when I worked at a grocery store on Long Island. Then I went to school upstate New York, Binghamton. Thought I was going to get a PhD in psychology. Went to University of Delaware on a full ride to get my PhD. And 1 semester later, I realized that I wasn't committed enough to spend 7 years getting a PhD. So I dropped out of the PhD program. I worked on Wall Street. I was an equity analyst. And then because of some serendipity and playing fantasy baseball with a buddy of mine who happened to work in BC, he recruited me in to work with him at his BC shop. And I worked in venture capital in 2001 to 2003. Terrible time is during the dot-com bubble burst. After that, I read the book Moneyball by Michael Lewis, and since some of you might be familiar with that, and I decided that I wanted to work in baseball. So I went down to the baseball winter meetings in Nashville, Tennessee, and the minor league baseball meetings in Atlanta, Georgia. Came back with jobs working for the New York Mets and the Toronto Blue Jays, both the Mets and the Blue Jays minor league affiliates. Realized that the pay sucked and the work-life balance sucked, so my opportunity cost was quite low. They were paying me $20,000 a year and wanted to relocate me to Manchester, New Hampshire. Instead of that, I decided to go back to business school, and I went to Columbia Business School. After CVS, I wanted to work in marketing. I wanted to stay in New York, where I've always been, except for that 3-month stint in Delaware. Set my sights on top marketing companies that have headquarters or major locations in New York, and that brought me to Amex. Was at Amex for 5.5 years. I got tired of people telling me that careers in Amex are like a marathon, not a sprint. And I like to move fast. So I looked into the tech landscape, applied to several companies, with Google being my top choice. Got someone to listen to me finally there. 11 interviews later, I got hired by Google. Was at Google for 5.5 years. Then I decided to be tempted into the startup space. I worked for Datadog as a consultant there. Then I worked as a VP of operations at a company called Andela, reporting right into the COO. I quickly realized that startups they have some positives, they have some negatives, but there's much more positive in big tech. And I decided to go back to big tech, went to Facebook, now called Meta. And I was there for 1.5 years. My boss from there left to go to Tableau. I followed him to Tableau. Tableau was acquired by Salesforce. And then I was at Salesforce until the first day of fall in 2021, when I left Salesforce and went all in on my company, Kadima Careers. I got some swag here. Got lots of swag. That's the biggest thing I miss from the big tech space is swag. And I started Kadima Careers, where I help to accelerate careers, help people get great jobs at the world's best companies. So that's a little bit about me and my career jungle gym. Next up, so I'm going to be telling you a little bit about how to get into the tech sector, how to interview and be most effective and efficient with that. The reason why you should listen to me is not just because I'm here and hosting the webinar, but I happen to be one of the top 1% interviewers in terms of interviewing people. I was not a recruiter, but I was a hiring manager. Hiring managers are the decision makers. And I've looked at lots of resumes. I've interviewed lots of people. I've interviewed about 800 people during my time at Google, including 225 people in 2015 alone. I also happen to be probably a top 1% candidate. I have interviewed at probably gone through 1,000 different interviews, interviewed at hundreds of different companies. I've gotten about 60 job offers, worked at 21 of those companies. I've held 29 jobs. Then before I started Kadima, I was like, hey, if I'm going to coach people on this, I got to dig in and do some research here. So I went crazy in terms of my job search. Partly, I wasn't sure if I was going to go all in on Kadima. But then by the end, that was like, hey, if I'm going to do Kadima, I got to know how interviewing and the job search works. So I applied for 300 roles. I interviewed for 47, got 5 offers, but that means I got rejected 295 times throughout the process. And then one other thing that it's hard not to talk about is I've been fortunate enough to have some education and privilege in my life. I was born a white dude in the 1970s, of Jewish descent. If I was born 30 or 40 years earlier in Germany, where my ancestors were, I likely would not, well, I'd probably be dead because I'd be 30 or 40 years older, but my life would have turned out very differently. And I've also had the privilege of going to a top business school like VUCA, except slightly further north up here in New York. And my MBA was probably a lot cheaper than yours back in 2005. I only sunk in $138,000 of money into my MBA. So, want to talk a little sense here and talk a little bit current events. Everybody knows the job market is kind of tough. These are just some headlines that I grabbed. I grabbed these probably 2 or 3 months ago. I can probably freshen them up with Google and Microsoft and Salesforce and others. But these companies are laying off massive amount of people. The top 5 companies, Google laid off 12,000, Microsoft laid off 10,000, Salesforce laid off 8,000, Amazon laid off 18,000, and Salesforce laid off 8,000. So those 5 alone laid off 59,000 people. As a reminder for everybody that is going into a job, that had a job before, that will work at some company in their life, this is not so surprising. The amount of layoffs occurring in the news, the constant chatter of the news, that's a little disconcerting, but this is a language in a Google offer letter. You can see this in almost any company offer letter. You are employed at will. And what it means to be employed at will is a company can fire you for any reason at any time. But as we'll talk about here, you can leave for any reason at any time. So you can look at it as you're employed at will, or you can look at it as, hey, I'm a free agent and I can go anywhere and anytime for any reason. And again, like I talked a little bit about these numbers, it's important for people to keep perspective. So these news agencies, whether it's Information or LinkedIn or Wall Street Journal, they're talking about all these layoffs, and these layoffs are tough for those 59,000 people that were impacted by these companies. And I think the number's up to about 250,000 people have been laid off by tech. But if you look at actually the net increase of talent at these organizations, these companies have overhired. They hired 182,000 people during the pandemic, and they laid off 59,000. So the net increase to these companies was 123,000 people. It doesn't make it any easier for those 59,000 individuals. But what I'm trying to demonstrate here is that there is still a lot of growth in the tech space. If you look at, even with these layoffs, these spot companies alone increased their headcount by 5.8% over the last year. So there's still opportunities here. And all of these companies, by the way, are still hiring. They have open roles on their job boards right now. So despite that, despite the layoffs, despite the difficult times here, I'm going to talk a little bit about why tech is still the right place to look at. You don't need to work in tech. I'm assuming because you guys are in the Duke Tech MBA club, you do have a penchant to work in tech. These are still some of the most respected companies in employee surveys. If you look at Glassdoor, which is a pretty good indicator of company culture and company feedback, They're some of the most respected. They treat employees well. They pay employees really well, and I'll share that with you shortly. You're still hiring. They're not hiring. I actually got to probably change. They're still hiring. They're not hiring a lot, but they're still hiring. So, for instance, Google during their peak was hiring they had about 9,500 jobs opened. I looked the other day and they have about 810 jobs open. 810 are still a lot of jobs. They're not all MBA related jobs per se. There's still a lot of jobs. There's about 400 jobs as media job openings at some of these top companies. And this is something that's near and dear to my heart. A big reason why I started Kadima is to help underrepresented, underestimated, underpaid talent to level the playing field to navigate the opacity and complexity of jobs in this space. All these companies are talking a big game about diversity. They're not really walking the talk so much, but at least they are talking there. And actually, on the positive side, they are sharing that information very transparently. Although I'll be curious to see what they do this year, how transparent they are, because their numbers are going to suffer because they have stopped recruiting a lot of diverse talent. Going back to the compensation, this is median compensation for some of the top companies in the world. And I'm assuming like I had in my MBA program, probably took stats, or we've had an undergrad. Just as a quick reminder for median is not average, but that means if Meta has 80,000 employees, that means about 40,000 of them are making north of $293,000. And if you take that into perspective here, Google has about 178,000 employees, and that's after the layoffs, I believe. That means that about 89,000 employees are making nearly $300,000 or more. And those are more people than that can fit in MetLife Stadium. I'm a Giants fan. MetLife Stadium holds 82,500 people. And I was pretty happy that the Eagles lost, because as a Giants fan, I'm not a big Eagles fan. But there are still lots of lucrative opportunities at these companies. Oh yeah, there's a Google open role. So there's 810 open roles there. Assume that not all of them are at above the median. Let's just assume that 25% are. So that means there are 200 lottery tickets out there to be claimed that are paying $300,000 plus a year. So these companies are still very attractive to work at. They're still very innovative. They still treat employees darn well. Here's a little, I'm very transparent with my income and my salary. You can actually see my last W-2 from Salesforce. I posted that on LinkedIn. When I went from American Express to Google back in 2011, I made an immediate increase in my comp by 62%, $62,000, 37% increase. Most of that was in the equity, the RSUs, and that's where these companies really make it very valuable for employees, short-term and long-term. Then, fast forward a decade later, I went up more than doubling my salary. That's what I left with at Salesforce at the end of my career, $540,000. It's slightly different than my W-2 because anyway, my W-2 shows $515,000. There's slight number difference there, but I'm not showing this here to brag. But what I am showing this to you is the opportunity to earn some significant ROI on your MBA after you get out of Duke and when you start applying it to a professional career. To give you a little indicator of how this can compound over time, many of you are familiar with CAGR, compound annual growth. My compound annual growth of my career before switching to tech was about 8% annually. And I was probably climbing at a decent clip, getting promoted at a decent amount at Amex. But once I went into the tech space, my compound annual growth increased went to about 13%. And that is with me making lots of mistakes. And I can go through those if you want, but the difference over the course of a decade of me working in tech was an incremental difference of about $236,000. Actually, this wasn't me. This is just like modeling it for other people. if you assume that you're making $100,000 out of school, and then you move into a tech role that will pay you more, you will take it like an immediate bump. Then you look at the 10-year projection. This will lead to an incremental 236,000 in annual comp. And over the course of that decade, it will yield $1.2 million in additional compensation. Obviously, Uncle Sam's going to get a big piece of that, and your kids or your student loans will get a big piece of that. But that 1.2 million is a hell of a lot better to be in your pocket than not. So when I speak to MBAs, I try to level set that there are lots and lots of opportunity for MBAs to have a very lucrative, very successful career in tech. So all tech roles are not technical. I am not technical, despite all the time of me working at Google, interviewing lots of people. I don't know how to code. I don't know. I understand what algorithms are, but I couldn't explain how they work per se. But there are 2/3 of roles that are non-technical in nature that are the sweet spot for MBAs, and also where these tech companies really gobble up talent. And it's like I list out a lot of the names here: biz dev, partnership, customer success, project management, product management, program management, and product management sometimes, depending on the company. So at Google and Facebook, product management are considered technical roles. At some other companies like Microsoft, they could be technical too. Amazon, they can be technical. But there are lots of roles, and about 2/3 of the roles. When I left Google, there were about 80 or 90,000 employees, and only about 2/3 of them rolled up to the sales organization. I was not a salesperson. I was not on a quota, but I worked in customer success. I worked in operations. I worked in support management and things of that nature. So there are lots of opportunities there for non-tech roles. So that being said, I highly recommend that people continue to shoot for the moon, and the moon are still the FANGs, Facebook, and now it's called, I guess, MANs. But Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, Google, there's still lots of great companies out there, but I do highly recommend that people continue to shoot for the moon. If you set your sights high and you set your goals high, you will land amongst the stars. If you don't get there right away, there's also stepping stone opportunities to get to some of those larger tech companies. And there's actually benefit for some of the smaller tech companies. Well, not that Adobe is small, not that Salesforce is small, but there are also startups and more nascent organizations like Gong, which is pre-IPO, Stripe, which is an exciting company as well. So there's lots of opportunity in the tech landscape. When I talk to MBAs, when I talk to individuals, they're like, well, I don't want to work for a big company. I want to work for a startup. And there are lots of great things about startups, but all startups are not created equal. So just to give you a little sense on my background, I shared on the Jungle Gym. I worked in venture capital for 2.5 years. We had an adage there, which was pretty common for the venture space. It wasn't unique to my VC shop that I worked at. General expectation is about 1/3 of the investments that a venture capital firm makes is going to crap out, just going to go belly up. About 1/3 of them will return even money. They'll get their money back. And about 1/3 of them will carry the lift, will carry the results of the venture capital firm. So it's great for venture capitalists because they have that portfolio theory. They're investing in 20, 50, 100 companies. But you as an employee, you picking one of those startups, in 2 out of those 3 cases, it's not going to turn out so well for you, because a lot of people join startups because they're really tempted and excited by the equity, and equity is in the form of options. In 2 out of those 3 cases, unless you are the founder or in the C-suite, or unless you are part of the investment group, the investment management group, like the VCs, you are not going to get your long-term value out of those options. So when people look at startups, depending on how far along they are, I generally recommend that you discount the value of those options because they likely are not going to pay out. However, there are ways to increase the likelihood that you select a positive, like a good startup. Some of those factors are, look at the investors. Are they being invested by Sequoia and A16Z and Benchmark and companies like that? Look at the leadership team. Where are those leaders coming from? Have they actually had multiple exits before? Look at their recent funding. Is there momentum there? Is their valuation growing? Look at their business model. You're probably taking Michael Porter's strategy course or other strategy courses, but understand the business model, understand how the company is making money. Next up, barriers to entry. What is unique about this company that others can come in and replicate, or a big incumbent can come in and squash a startup? Look at revenue. If you are getting close to taking an offer, the company should be transparent with you with the revenue. Once you join that company, you should understand how much revenue that company is generating and what sort of trajectory they are on revenue. You don't need to worry about profit at startups, but you do need to understand what the revenue is and that the revenue is growing. And then another thing, I do highly recommend Glassdoor reviews, especially like you got to be mindful of it. Like a really tiny startup may have very small number of surveys submitted, but assuming that there's a decent number of surveys, Glassdoor is actually a fairly good proxy for what's going on within the company. And again, as I said before, be cautious about the options. Don't let that cloud over your perspective. The startup may tell you about all these potential riches and rewards that you have at your a carrot dangling in front of you like a horse, but most likely that carrot will dry up and you will never be able to grab that carrot. Terrible analogy. I'm struggling there. But anyway, be cautious with the options. So now let me talk a little bit about job acquisition and specifically how the top tech companies acquire talent. And I'll talk a little bit also about how it differs for first-year MBAs and second-year MBAs. There are 3 points of entry to be considered for a job, and this is probably more applicable to second-year MBAs that may or may not have a job. If you're a first-year MBA, most of your way of getting in is through the recruiting process, on-campus recruiting, also through the internship process. I will talk about that if you have questions, but I'm assuming that your career management center has done a pretty decent job on that. But for second years and also for your life after you're outside of Fuqua, there are primarily 3 points of entry to be considered for a job. And what I consider being considered for a job is actually talking and being considered by a human being. So you can cold apply. You can submit an application, and tons of people are submitting applications there. Probably about 90% of applications come in through the cold application process. On the recruited side, you could be fortunate enough that someone is looking at you on LinkedIn, that you have a Fuqua MBA, that you have some other good company logos on your background previously, that you have the right job description that they are looking to hire, and you may be reached out to on LinkedIn. And that's the least popular method, because companies need to have a recruiting team to be reaching out to be proactively reaching out to you. So the recruited channel is something that you can control very minimally, except to have your LinkedIn profile up to date and make sure that you are advertising all your assets. The biggest channel in terms of success is a referral channel. Only 7% of applications come in through a referral, and yet 40% of hires come in through the referral channel. This is your best chance of success. I'm sure many of you can relate to this, thinking about past jobs you've had. In my case alone, out of the 29 jobs I've had in my career, 24 of those doors were open because somebody said, hey, this guy Alan's a decent person, you should chat with him. I still had to pass their interviews, and I was referred to a hell of a lot more than just 24. I was probably referred to hundreds of jobs over the course of my career. I didn't land those. But the ones that I landed often came 24 to 29 times through referrals. So these are the 3 entry points to be considered for a job. And then that gets you into what I call the job acquisition funnel. This is a job acquisition funnel. At the top of that screen in the yellow is where you are competing with other resumes, with ATS, application tracking software, which is one of the most misunderstood and overestimated software out there, like in any industry. ATS and application tracking softwares are essentially just used as a CRM, a customer relationship management tool. People that are trying to optimize their resume for an ATS are spending too much time on efforts that are of too little value. So once you submit into the ATS, the recruiter will look through those hundreds, if not thousands, of roles. They may quickly do a search to X out some people that don't have a minimum years of experience or don't have certain visa status or things of that nature. But then they will actually manually review each and every resume not physically, but on their screen, and they will quickly decide keep, kill, or penned, put it into like a pending bucket. And they are spending about 6 to maybe 60 seconds per application and quickly making that decision. Then once they get to maybe 50, they will call that down to about 10 to 20 individuals that recruiter will reach out to you and say, hey, we saw that you applied for this role in Amazon. You look like a great fit. We'd love to talk to you. So then about 20 people are reached out to by the recruiter. If you're fortunate enough to get reached out to by the recruiter, you're all excited. You're like, Spotify really wants me. The recruiter reached out. You are still competing with 10 to 20 other individuals. And so the odds are still stacked against you. If you get past the recruiter, you get to the hiring manager. And the hiring manager, you are competing usually with 5, usually you're in 5, sometimes up to 10 candidates. And that hiring manager, and I've been a hiring manager, will talk to candidates usually for 30 minutes and make a decision, am I going to pass this individual onto the loops or not? And once they get to be about 3 to 5 candidates, they will shut off the spigot. So you need to get in there fairly quickly. Then, if you're fortunate enough that the hiring manager, the recruiter passed and said you're good, you get to the interview loops. Once you're at the interview loops, sometimes they're called on-site or virtual on-sites. You think that you're golden, you're in the finals. Yeah, you're in the finals, but you're in the finals with 3 to 5 other people, usually 3 to 4 other people. You're competing. It's a competitive pool of 3 to 5 people. And then if you are the best of that bunch, you will be deemed hireable and the company will make an offer. And at that offer stage is when you first have that opportunity for hand or leverage. So what I try to do when I talk to people is kind of like thinking about a casino. You want to improve your odds at every stage. So you can go to a casino and you can bet on the roulette wheel, the worst odds. So you could just submit your resume and just spray and pray. You could play a game that is more effective, like blackjack. There are some strategies you can employ to improve your process. If you want to improve your odds further, play the craps table and you actually play against the house. I'm not going to go into details about that. If you want to improve your odds even further, you play at a single deck blackjack table. And if you want to tip the odds in your favor, where they'll actually kick you out of the casino for doing this because they don't like you actually improving your odds to be in your favor, you start counting cards. So what I try to teach people to do is how to count cards with their application process. With this, it's important to understand the difference between what you can control, and these are the things you can control: your interview prep for LinkedIn, your values. There's things that you can influence because the process is impure. You can influence your manager, your compensation. You can influence the result of the interview based on your quality. And then there's lots of stuff you have no control over. You have no control over the economy, what's going on, the layoffs. You have no control over who you're competing with at the end of the on-site loops. And you have no control over the decision-making process at the company. And I've seen a lot I've been on lots of interview panels, and I've heard lots of people rule out individuals for very silly reasons. One of the silliest ones is I had someone on my interview panel when I was interviewing candidates at Google, and she didn't like that people use the word strategy too much. And if anyone said strategy 3 times in an interview, she would rule them out. It was silly. It was arbitrary. She was no longer part of my interview panel. But she is someone that, I don't know if she's still at Google, but that was her policy. It's people talk too much strategy and not enough execution. She would rule them out. Going back to like the interviews, there's 3 stages. The recruiter screen, aka the gatekeeper, is trying to figure out, can you do the job? And can you, and are there any knockout factors? So like location, visa status, compensation. The hiring manager is trying to identify 2 specific things. Can you do the job that I have an opening for? And can I manage you? Because that person's going to be your manager. Then the loops are behavioral-based interviewing. I'm assuming that Fuqua is teaching you that using the STAR technique or the CAR technique, but those are very preparable. And that's how the interview process goes. And most people, if they are prepared and applying for the right jobs, should pass a recruiter screen at about an 80% clip, should pass a hiring manager screen at an 80% clip. And at the loop stage, it's a little bit of a crapshoot. And it really depends on who you're competing against. You could be competing against internal candidates, people with more season, more experience, relevant experience. You don't know what you're competing against. Once you get into the interviews, there are 4 phases of every interview. And again, I studied this before I started Kadima. The first part, rapport building. Because it is an imperfect process, you want to influence the process. And the way that you influence the process is you get people to like you. You do that by building rapport. That's always the first 5 minutes of an interview. Next, TMAY, or tell me about yourself. And I know Steve Dalton, the Fuqua School, actually had him on my podcast. He talks about the TMAY, tell me about yourself. That is going to occur in every interview. Then questions that they have for you. Most of these are behavioral based. Some of them are case based, but they are very preparable, especially if you set up 10 to 20 star stories ahead of time. And then questions from you. Questions, and you need to come with questions. You need to be prepared for that. Then, essentially, if you would deploy all these things, and this works really well in tech, like I help people in all different industries, but it works well in tech because tech is a competitive landscape. Lots of people want to work in tech. There's, I don't know how big Fuqua is in terms of student body, but 45 people joined this session here. And I don't know how big the tech MBA club is, but a lot of people want to work in tech. So when you are applying to a competitive industry like tech, it's important to first set your goals and set your target companies up. Secondly, realistically assess your strengths. So if your pre-MBA role was sales, but you want to switch into product, it's going to be damn hard. So I suggest that people play to their strengths to get in the door at the companies where they want to work. And then once inside the door, it's a lot easier to move around. Third part, which is critical, reaching out to people. If you do know that 40% of hires come through outreach, but only 7% of applicants are coming in through referrals, reach out to people that can refer you. Fourth is working in the system, getting applications in at the right place, and the right place are the first party job sites, not on LinkedIn, not on Glassdoor, not on Indeed, but at the first party job site. There's lots of reasons why. I can explain that in Q&A if you have questions. And apply for the right roles that reflect your strengths, and at the right time. And timing is critical, because if you look at that funnel, these companies are hiring on a first come, first served basis. And once they find a good candidate or a good group of 5 to get to the final round, they're going to shut the door until all those bomb out, and then they'll go back. But if you don't get in that first wave, you snoozed and you losed. Oh, next part, train for the interviews and develop tenacity. and resilience, because you will get rejected a lot, especially if you are aiming for the top tech companies. Especially if you're aiming for anything, especially in this economic climate, you have to be comfortable with getting rejected and look at each rejection as an opportunity to network with all those individuals that rejected you. Make sure you're linking with them, connecting with them on LinkedIn, and you will get better at interviewing. You will get more comfortable, you will get more confident, and you will get better results. And then finally, and this applies more to second years that are doing one-off hiring versus on-campus recruiting where they're hiring in batches. If you were looking for a role, and second years should be looking for roles right now, like we're February 16, you should be looking now because it's going to take 2 to 3 months to get a job. If you get a job sooner than school ends, take the damn job and you'll figure out how to complete your MBA. Well, that's my recommendation. You can do what you want. But if you do get a job that is not on-campus recruiting, not part of a bulk hire, where you are the one person that is chosen to be hireable for that role, once that offer is extended, that is when the negotiation should begin. You should not have a conversation before. You should head that off. But once they extend that offer, then you have hand, then you have leverage, and that's where high impact negotiation begins. And hopefully they give you that class on negotiations. If not, take it. If you didn't take it, read Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss, Getting TS, and Getting More by Stuart Diamond. Any or all of those books are fabulous. So that's all I got here for you. I've left 20 minutes for Q&A. I should have said beforehand, there's no need for you to take notes. I do share the slides. So if you go to the QR code or you go to kadimacareers.com/Duke, you can download these slides. And I think that's my last slide. Yep, that's my last slide. So with that, I will open this up to Q&A, and I will try to answer as many questions as I can. Or did I answer everybody's question? I'm happy to talk about first year. I'm happy to talk about internships. I'm happy to talk about the cultures of the companies. I'm happy to talk about anything tech related, where I think hot areas are in the market, whatever is really on your mind for folks that want to get into the tech space. So, Jasmine, you are first, and great name, by the way. Same name as my daughter, although my daughter spells it differently.
Love it.
What?
I said, love it. Thank you.
Yeah. So, would I please say more about the post-rejection steps? You mentioned connecting with the individuals who rejected you on LinkedIn. So, when you interview with someone, I always suggest beforehand to research them on LinkedIn, not to connect with them before on LinkedIn. Some people find that a little stalkerish. It's not a big faux pas if you do that, but I research them on LinkedIn before you meet them. Then after, I always advise people to send a thank you note, and ideally a thank you note in LinkedIn. So when you click on the connection, you click on connect and then add a note and say, hey, Jose, thanks a lot for taking the time to meet with me. I'm really excited about opportunities at Microsoft. Regardless of how things turn out, I'd love to connect with you here on LinkedIn. And what that does is a few different things. One, you would be surprised how few people write thank you notes. I'm not talking about a handwritten thank you note. That almost never occurs. But even an email or something on LinkedIn, it is so rare. So by even sending that thank you note, that will make you stand out. Secondly, you are adding a connection request, a connection on LinkedIn. And what that does, not only is that adding your network, and there's another adage that says your network is your net worth, and it does continue to pay off in dividends. So you're just graduating from your MBA in the next year or two, you will be working for 10, 20, 30, 40 years. So your connections will be with you forever. So you add to that. And I want to relate the story that I had with it. So, and if you get rejected, at least then you added 2 to 5 different connections that can be with you. Not everyone's going to accept, but about half of them do. And I have a story that when I was doing my interviews, my 300 interviews or my 300 applications, I interviewed at UiPath. And I thought the interview went well, but I didn't I got ghosted. I never got a response back from UiPath after that. But after I think I met with like 3 people there, one of them I sent a thank you note to. His name's Kyle. I was like, Kyle, it was great meeting you. I appreciate it. And regardless of what happens, I'd love to be connected with you here on LinkedIn. 18 months later, he reached out to me. He was at Datadog then. And he's like, oh, Alan, it's been a while. Sorry I never responded to your thank you request, but I see that you're open to work. And I actually had the green circle open to work on my profile, actually, because I was doing an experiment and it happened to work. And he's like, I'm looking to hire a director, or I forget if it's director or senior director role here on my team at Datadog. Would you be interested? So with the fact that we connected, the fact that I sent that thank you note, it caused him to reach out to me. I did not take that interview, but which I usually tell people to take interviews, but that was already all in our Kadima. So that's why you say that is the post-rejection step. Does that answer your question, Jasmine?
Yes, it does. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Sure. What other questions do folks have? People can either raise their hand or actually I don't know if that works because I think most people's cameras are off, so I don't know if I can see their hands. But does everybody at Duke always like keep your cameras off? It's interesting. Everybody in this call has cameras off. But thank you, Christian, for putting your camera on, succumbing to peer pressure. Oh, some people are putting their cameras on. So peer pressure works. Okay, so Eugene asks, do you recommend asking for feedback after getting rejected? Yes, I always recommend it, but I would never expect it. So you will almost never get feedback after speaking to a recruiter. If you get to the hiring manager, you likely still will not get feedback. If you get to the full loops and they spend some time with you, you are very often likely to get some feedback. And but some companies will just not tell you feedback at all. So you can ask and you can hope for it, and you can but you also have to realize that the companies, they say that they have a policy of not doing it. They don't want to open them up to legal liability. It's really out of laziness that the companies do this. I usually gave people feedback if they made it pretty far. But what I do suggest for people to get feedback is take your iPhone or take your Android phone or whatever, get a dictation app, or whatever you do for note taking. And when you interview, press the record button on your dictation app before the interview starts. Don't tell them that you're doing this. It's probably illegal, so don't say that you got this idea from me. Put your phone down on the side, record your interview. After you're done with the interview, listen to it and be hard on yourself. You will learn a lot. You will improve your interview skills by giving yourself feedback. So you can ask, so long answer, but yes, I recommend asking for feedback. No, you will likely not get your feedback. But sometimes I have gotten feedback, and one time at Stripe, I interviewed there and they told me I was too direct, and it was good feedback. So then I changed some of my messaging in future companies and future interviews, but that went very far with Stripe. We were talking about money. I got to the final round, and I was actually interviewing for other roles simultaneously. So there was some incentive for them to give me feedback. What other questions? I see, Christian, you got your hand raised. And you're on mute. The 3 most popular words since 2020, you're on mute.
So sorry about that. Thank you so much for doing this, Alan. I was just wondering if you could, I was interested in the mechanics that you were talking about, the difference between hiring in the first party website versus like LinkedIn or something like that.
Sorry. Oh, how do I differentiate between the first party sites versus the third party sites?
Yeah, like the mechanics of why it is you have a better chance on the first party site versus third party.
So if you're Google right now, they have 810 jobs available, where that was like when I did this, put this presentation together for you. Not all of those roles are on LinkedIn. Not all of those roles are Indeed. Partially because those companies charge them for listing, and partly because sometimes they don't list all the jobs on those third-party sites. And different companies have different policies with this. So I've been at different companies. Like when I was at Tableau, it cost us money to list things on LinkedIn. So we would do it on our site. And only if it was like a high profile role or something we were struggling to hire with, we would put it on the third party sites. So if you want, so what I rather tell people to do is to create a target list of companies, usually at least 40 deep, put together a hyperlink to the URL of the first party site. So it could be like spotify.com/jobs or netflix.com/careers. And if you want, you can actually download, like I have all those first party job sites. If you go to kadimacareers.com/top100, I have the first party sites. You can also Google them, but they're just all aggregated there. If you want to just download that at kadimacareers.com/top100. The first party sites are more comprehensive, more exhaustive, and they will be the freshest roles. So if you remember that job acquisition funnel, you want to be getting in there sooner than later because because of speed, because of the freshness of the roles, and because of the comprehensiveness of the listings, that's why I want to go to the first party sites. What the third party sites are good for is to come up with other ideas of companies that you might want to add to your target list. And what LinkedIn is really good at is, jobs recommended for you. And that might indicate companies that have a high propensity of jobs that match your skill set. So then you may want to add that company to your target list. And then once a week, I suggest people going to their target list because you don't need to look every day at these job boards. Just as long as like once a week, you're good, because that's how the recruiting goes. So like when I work with a recruiter, I would say, okay, let's open this job. And then we would wait like a week, maybe like 2 weeks until the recruiter would take all those resumes that came in. She would say she, because 80% of recruiters are women for some reasons I can go into if you want. So you want to get it within a week. So that's why you go to the first party sites and not rely on the third party sites. You can complement your efforts with the third party site, but the likelihood of you getting a cold application, consideration to speak to a human through a third party site is a lot lower than if you apply directly on their first party site. And some companies I've worked at also treat them differently. So they're like, hey, Christian is applying to our job board at Tableau. He has an interest in Tableau, but if he's applying on LinkedIn, he's just looking for jobs. So they assume that there's a higher yield if you're applying right on their site.
That definitely makes sense. Yeah, that definitely makes sense. I never really thought about the difference, so that's actually really helpful.
Yeah, cool. And then Francisco has a question here. I think he's next here. Okay, yeah, he's next. How do you recommend reaching out to people before the application on LinkedIn? As an international student, sometimes it's hard to find people at our target companies. So going to Fuqua, you have a huge advantage because there's lots of Fuqua alum. I'm sure when they sold you on coming to Fuqua, they talked about their huge and supportive alumni database. So what you look at is people at Duke that now are at that company that you want to work at. You say, hey, Tamika, I see that you work at SAP. Or no, actually, that's not how you first reach out. We first reach out is you see Tamika working at SAP, and maybe SAP is a company you want to work for. But you just reach out to Tamika and say, hey, Tamika, I see you went to Fuqua. I went to Fuqua too. I love connecting with Blue Devil alum, or whatever you guys call yourselves. Like, I know that's a basketball name, but whatever the normal parlance is for you. And you send out connection requests to 30 people at SAP. And Steve Dalton, again, like this comes from like his book, The 2-Hour Job Search. And a lot of that has influenced like my framework in addition to some other books and my own experience. You reach out, you build a relationship on a commonality that you have, not because you want to get a job. And you build those relationships before you want the referral. Because if you just are reaching out to someone transactionally and say, hey, I see you work at SAP, I'm trying to get a job there. Can you put me in as a recommendation? That's going to have a much lower hit rate than building and developing relationships ahead of time. So identify those target companies, figure out if you have an advocate there. If not, build relationships at those companies. So hopefully that answers your question, Francisco. Now I see Carla with her hand raised. And you're on mute as well. It's not you, Mike. I think you're on mute. Oh, no, you're not on mute, but I just can't hear you. So maybe if you want to type it into the chat, I can answer, but I can't hear you. Now you're on mute, but I can't hear you. Even when you're off mute, I can't hear you. So something's not right with your audio visual stuff or just your audio stuff. Okay, you can type it. Well, Carlos typing. If anyone else has questions, they can submit it in the Q&A or raise your hand as well. I'm just curious. I don't know if Thibaut, you know this, or Margaret knows this, what the mix of students are here first year versus second year. Is it like a 50-50 mix, or? You're on mute, Thibaut.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the list. I definitely see a good mix of first year and second years. I recognize many second years and some I don't know as well. So I think there's both interest in, like, figure out what they should be doing right now to either find an internship or to find, their next full-time position for the foreseeable future.
Yeah. So for internship, you got to hustle because these companies are lowering their internship hires. And then I'll answer your question in a second, Carla. You got to hustle. So you got to look at, create your target list of companies, look at their sites, understand how their internship process works, and build relationships at those companies. A lot of the companies that used to hire mass amounts, like Google and Facebook and Amazon and Salesforce, are pulling back a lot of their MBA internships. So you got to get more creative, and you have to expand your aperture of what you're looking at. That's for the internship. For the second year, I would look now. I would because a job search typically takes 3 to 6 months. So if you start looking now, if you happen to get a great job next week, I'm sure you can talk to Duke. I don't know, I don't want to say anything, but you came to Fuqua to get a great job. So if you get a great job and they want you to, usually you can have some flexibility with the start date. So you can usually push it. But I would be, if I was a second year, I'd be doing your job search now. Otherwise, expect that it's going to take 3 to 6 months from when you start doing your concerted job search. So Carla has a question. Do you have a particular tip to break into the industry? Promo code for students at Fuqua? Yes. I do get $500 off of places I speak at. So if you do want to apply for Kadima, you get $500 off. But particular tip to break into the industry. So I'm assuming you're not in the tech industry and you're looking to pivot into the tech industry. So this is what I suggest. Play to your strengths. So I don't know what you did previously. Actually, I'll look at you on LinkedIn if that's okay. Let me just look at you on LinkedIn, and then I'll give you better advice on what I would suggest for you. Here you are. This is you, right? Okay. So I would look at your past. Sales and project manager, head of HR. So you worked at EY, that's good. Purchasing department, human capital analyst. So it looks like HR, maybe on the, I guess, sales and project managers. So my advice to you is try to pick a lane of a function that you're strongest at, that you can talk the most of. So whether it's sales, whether it's project management, whether it's HR, try to try to accentuate those strengths that you have. Also, looks like from Mexico, I'm assuming you speak Spanish and English. So that's another strength that you have. So leverage that strength. If there's some Latin roles that are available, that's a strength. And the biggest thing, build relationships. Identify your target companies, reach out to people that have some commonality with you, either Fuqua, either EY, maybe from Mexico, some commonality, and start talking to them and earn those referrals. Don't ask for referrals. You really want to earn it, because when you ask for referrals, everybody's going to say, yes, I'll refer you. And only about 50% of them will actually go ahead and do it. So that's my advice for you. Another good piece of advice is there's a great book by Don Ram called Switchers, Switchers. I can just put it on the screen here. That's a good book as well. But she would tell you basically essentially what I told you there, but more eloquently. Okay. And then I think we're at time. I can probably take one more question if people have it. Otherwise, I encourage people to reach out to me on LinkedIn. If I can help with your career, you can go check out our website, KadimaCareers.com. We offer lots of solutions to help individuals out. And if there's one last question, I'll take it. Otherwise, thank you. Niv, shalom to you too. I don't speak much Hebrew. Kadima and shalom are probably two of the 5 words I know. And Kadima I only got because of a buddy of mine who's Israeli told me the name. And Kadima means forward. So I help accelerate careers. So looks like everybody's leaving. Thank you, Thibaut. Thank you, Margaret, for inviting me. Hopefully this was a good session for folks. I think when you download the slides, I think there's a survey also to see what you thought and give you feedback. I would love feedback. Always looking to improve.
Sounds good. Thank you, Alan.
Thank you so much, Alan.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.